Hello and welcome, dear student. I welcome you again to this wonderful subject and wonderful topic. Remember, we are looking at social studies and this is a standard 8. In standard 8, there are a number of topics, about 26 units altogether. Now, this is unit 3. Remember, last time we were looking at the movements of the earth. In that lesson, you remember that we said that two basic movements of the earth is rotation and revolution. So we looked at that. Remember those things. If you have forgotten, please go back to that video and see what is there. But today we are on unit number 3, and unit number 3, it's all about the West African slave trade. West African slave trade. In this unit, we are going to look at a number of issues. We are going to look at how slaves were done in West Africa. We are going to look at the movements, how they were moved, or the items, the trade items. And at the end, we are also going to look at the abolition. Abolition means the end of slave trade. We are going to look at all those things. Now, to begin with, let us look at the causes. What were the causes of slave trade in West Africa? What were the causes? Number one is it's all about the British. So the British settlers in America who wanted laborers to work in their cotton and tobacco plantations. The British settlers in America who wanted laborers to work in their cotton and tobacco plantations. Here we are talking about the British who had farms. Plantations are big farms. So there were the British in America who wanted people, laborers, to work in their farms right there in America. And another one is the Spaniards who wanted laborers to work as miners in their gold and silver mines, and also farmers to work in their cotton and sugar plantations in South and Central America. So apart from the British, there were also the Spaniards, the Spaniards. The Spaniards are the people from Spain. They are also called the Spanish or the Spaniards. So the Spaniards also, they had mines in South and Central America. So they wanted more people to work there. Remember, we are talking of the time or the period when there were no machinery to work in the farms. There were no tractors by then. So work in the farm relied on manpower. So they wanted more people. As a result, they resorted to West Africa to get people who could work as slaves, and they were shipped to America to work as laborers in the farms. So we are talking of the cotton and tobacco for the British, then silver mines and gold mines for the Spaniards, and also the Spaniards, they also had cotton and sugar farms in America. These two, the British and the Spanish, they wanted cheap labor. So the question can be, why did they come to West Africa to get people? Were there no people in America? People were there in America, but them now, they wanted cheap labor. They wanted cheap labor. They wanted to have many people to be working for them at no cost or at a very little cost. So that's what we call cheap labor. Now, we have looked at the causes of slave trade in West Africa. This time around, let's look at the ways how slaves were obtained. How were they obtaining slaves in West Africa? So there were a number of ways. Number one is through chiefs who waged wars against one another, and the losers were exchanged for foreign goods such as gin, rolls of cotton, and gum. So we are talking here that the chiefs in the villages there in West Africa, they were waging wars. They were fighting this village against the other village. The village that loses, it was captured by that village, and waiting for the people to come. And those people were coming with cloth, they were coming with gin. Gin is beer, anyway. They were coming with gin, and they were also coming with guns. So these three items were brought to West Africa from Europe. So those people who were captured, they were sold to say, these are weak people, carry them, go with them wherever you want them to go. So that was way number one of getting slaves in West Africa. What was the other one? Also through chiefs who sold criminals and those accused of being witches and wizards. You know, in every society, there are some people who are troublesome people, the criminals. They are stealing chickens in the village. They are stealing some people's properties. Those people, by that time, the chiefs therefore were getting them to say, hey, you are causing trouble in this village. Therefore, the chief could sell all those people to say, when those people from Europe come with cloth, with gin, and with guns, they could say, here is a criminal. We are selling him. Please go with him. Or those people, also those people who were accused to be witches or wizards, to say, you want to finish the village by your magic. Therefore, we capture you. When those people come, they are going to get you and you'll be sold. You go with them. So they were selling them. So way number one was through wars. Way number two was through selling out of those people accused of witchcraft and those who were criminals in the society. Another way was through foreigners who could attack a village and took the captives away. So this was another way, again, of getting slaves. How? We have just said that the foreigners were coming, and they are coming with guns. So when they come in the village, then they could scare the people by shooting maybe in the air. Don't run away, don't run away. We want everyone to come here. Let everyone come here. Then all the people could come at one place. Then they could say, starting from this time around, you have been captured. Now you will go where we are going. So we are going together with us. So the foreigners could come, attack the societies, and capture them and sell them away. So those are the three major ways of getting the slaves. That's how slaves were taken from West Africa. Way number one, through wars, village and village. Way number two, the chiefs again, they were selling out those causing trouble in the society, like the criminals and the witches. Way number three, we have said that the foreigners, sometimes they could come, attack the society and capture the whole community, go with it wherever they wanted to go. So remember those three ways how slaves were captured in West Africa. Now from here, let us now look at the roots of this slave trade. So we are going to look at the Great Triangle Trade. The Great Triangle Trade. So the Triangle Trade, by this, we mean the roots now how it was done. So the slaves or slave trade in West Africa soon developed into what was known as the Triangle Trade. It was called the Triangle Trade, or sometimes the Great Triangle Trade. Britain, West Africa, and West Indies, which is now called the Caribbean, were the trading partners which were greatly involved in the Triangle Trade. So there were 3 points, there were 3 countries or 3 areas that were involved in the Great Triangle Trade. The first one, Britain. The second one, Africa. The third one, the Caribbean, which by then it was called the West Indies. So these were the 3 points. So from Britain to Africa to West Indies. Then they go back home. Then they start again the journey from Britain, West Africa, West Indies. They go back like that. So that's why it was called the Triangle Trade. The Triangle Trade. So it was called a triangle trade because the trade routes formed a triangular shape. Just as I said, from Britain to West Africa to West Indies, then back home, like that. So because of the shape of the route, how those traders were moving from home in Britain, coming to West Africa, going to West Indies, back home, like that. So that's why it was called the triangle trade. So the ship left England for West Africa, loaded with foreign goods such as cloth, guns, and gin. Cloth, gun, and gin. So what happened therefore from England? We have said that they were getting the ships from England, they were getting the foreign goods that were coming. We have already mentioned that they were carrying cloth, that is cotton, gin and guns. They were bringing them to West Africa. So when they came to West Africa, they were exchanging those things with people, with slaves. So how were they getting slaves? Remember those three ways we have already mentioned. So when they were coming with goods, already they could find slaves readily available. They could just exchange. Then the ships left West Africa for America carrying the slaves. Then the slaves were taken from West Africa now, going to America with them. So in America, slaves were exchanged for raw materials such as sugar and cotton. So when those slaves reached America, then those owners of those ships, they could sell the slaves in exchange for sugar and cotton, and they could get that cotton back home to their countries. So thereafter, the ships returned to England carrying the raw materials. What are these raw materials? Sugar and cotton. There in England, they could process that cotton into cloth, then start off again the journey coming back to Africa, get slaves to America, back home, like that. So that's why it was called like the triangle trade, the triangle trade. So in this way, they completed the triangle trade. So that's what we call the triangle trade. From England, West Africa, America, back to England, like that. So the circle of slave trade in West Africa, it made the triangle, or the Great Triangle. Now, having looked at the triangle trade, let's now look at the effects. What were the effects of slave trade in West Africa? Now, in West Africa, this slave trade, it had so many effects. Number one, we are saying villages were destroyed. Villages were destroyed. Just as we have said, in the way how slaves were captured. Village and village fighting. A village that loses, all those people were taken as slaves and they were sold out. Is there a village there? No way. That means that village has been completely destroyed. It will never be there forever. So villages were destroyed. And people were carried away and some were killed. So we see here that people were carried away, and even in the process, some lost their lives. They were killed. When they were shipped from West Africa to America, some of those who were weak, who were sick in the way, no way for medicine. They were not given any medicine when they were sick, malaria, whatever. Whoever is sick, this one can give us trouble. They could just pick that one, throw him in the ocean. Then the fish, the shark, they could find food to eat. So look at that. People were killed. And also guns and gunpowder were introduced in Africa. So what we see here is guns and gunpowder. That is, guns were introduced in Africa. As a result, it encouraged maybe criminals to be shooting each other. People were, they started stealing from other people because they had guns, like that. And also some African chieftain ships were destroyed. Some African chieftain ships were destroyed. So what we are saying is African leaders were they lost their authority. For example, when we talk again about the villages that lost the battle, it means that the chief and all its people were taken away, which means the the chiefs, they lost their authorities. Also, many areas in Africa became depopulated. So many areas in Africa, they became depopulated. What we mean there is that people were carried away, and most places in Africa, they were left desolate without people, and it was depopulated. So only the weak and maybe the old people were left behind. All energetic people were carried out, and as a result, many areas in Africa, they were depopulated. And many slaves died on their way to America due to ill treatment. So we have touched on that point to say that as they were shipping from West Africa to America, what happened was that they were ill-treated. No food. Sometimes 3-4 days they were given food once. So look at that. They were ill-treated. They were chained. They were not allowed to move freely. They were chained. Legs and arms, they were tied. One to the other, or neck by neck, like that. So you can see to it. So you can see that things were not really okay. And Africans lost their identity in the foreign land and were treated as an inferior race. So Africans, even when they went to America there, they lost their identity. They were treated as properties, not as people. So they had nothing to say, they had nothing to complain. They were not taken as people, so they lost their identity. So it was really pathetic. So slave trade had really those great effects. Now, let us watch this small video clip, and see how slave trade was done in West Africa. It was really pathetic. So let us go through this clip.
Historians estimate that between 1500 and 1870, more than 11 million men and women were carried across the Atlantic Ocean in ships like these. The passengers were forcibly transported from Africa to the West Indies, Brazil, or other lands of the Americas. These people were enslaved Africans, and their lives on board the slave ships were filled with pain, suffering, and death. In the 1500s, Europeans saw enslaved Africans as a source of inexpensive labor for their colonies. European planters established plantations or huge farms in North America, South America, and the Caribbean. As the plantations grew, more slaves were needed to work on them. Slavery had existed in Africa since ancient times. Some African kings and merchants captured people and sold them as slaves to European traders, as well as to Arab merchants. When the demand grew, kings often sent their warriors to attack neighboring villages for slaves. The Europeans treated slaves like cargo. They were locked inside cells for weeks until ships could take them to colonies across the ocean. For slaves, life on a slave ship during the Middle Passage was a nightmare. Even crew members were shocked by the conditions in the slave holds.
When I had to enter the slave deck, I was forced to crawl over the slaves. The Negroes are frequently packed so close together that they have not so much room as a man in his coffin. I was so overcome with the heat, stench, and foul air that I nearly fainted. It was only with assistance I could get on deck.
Alexander Falconbridge. Although the transatlantic slave trade, the bringing of slaves from Africa to the Americas, was abolished by U.S. law in 1804, some traders chose to ignore the law. They continued to capture Africans and transport them across the Atlantic. On June 28, 1839, the Amistad set sail from Havana, Cuba, bound for the Cuban coastal town of Puerto Principe. On board, Captain Ramon Ferrer carried a cargo of 53 African slaves purchased in Havana. An African on board the Amistad named Seneba Pie fought the men who tried to enslave him and other Africans. One dark night, Seneba Pie, called Cinque by his captors, unlocked his shackles using pieces of metal he'd found on the ship. Working quickly, he freed the rest of the slaves, and they prepared to attack their captors. The Africans took over the Amistad. The cabin steward translated the Africans' demand: sail the ship back to Africa or the crew would be killed. Instead of sailing for Africa, the currents of the Gulf Stream pulled the Amistad north. In the summer of 1839, American newspapers along the eastern seaboard reported wild stories of a ship manned by black pirates. An American ship called the Washington found the Amistad and captured it. The ship, including the Africans, was taken into custody. The Spanish government, which had colonized Cuba, demanded that President Martin Van Buren send the Africans to Cuba, where they would remain slaves. But former President John Quincy Adams thought that the slaves should remain free. He argued that since they had been taken from Africa illegally, they were not then legally slaves. For more than a year, Adams fought for the Africans' release. On March 9, 1841, the Supreme Court of the United States announced its decision.
It is the ultimate right of all human beings in extreme cases to resist oppression and to apply force against ruinous injustice.
Seneba Pie and the other captives were freed. The United States Supreme Court had recognized these Africans as free human beings. Although the Atlantic slave trade came to an end in the 1800s, the damage had been done. African societies were disrupted by depopulation and warfare. Some 2 million people had died on slave ships, and millions more had been forced to endure a life of slavery.
I guess you have gone through or you have watched that small clip, and it has you have taken some lessons there on slave trade in West Africa. That's how it was. People were tied hands and legs, neck to neck, like that. No freedom. So it was really pathetic. Having looked at that, now let us look at the abolition of slave trade. Abolition, it means to end something. So how did slave trade come to an end? So let us look at the factors that led to the end of slavery. In Britain, many Christians felt that the slave trade was evil. So you can remember that we said that those who were coming to West Africa to get slave trade or slaves, they were coming from Britain, that is in England. But again, in the passage of time, also there in England, some Christians, they felt that no, what we are doing is not good. This is evil. The trade of or the buying and selling of people is not good. So they started to say, no, we cannot do this. So as a result, a movement against slave trade started in England in the 18th century. So with the Christian view, then later on there was a movement to fight against slave trade, to say no, we need not to embark on this business. Although we are doing good in this business, it is a profitable business, but we cannot go on with this business. So people like John Wesley, Thomas Clarkson, William Wilberforce, and Granville Sharp, they spoke strongly against slave trade at public meetings, in parliament, and in churches. So these people, John Wesley, Thomas Clarkson, William Wilberforce, and Granville Sharp, all from England, they started to speak strongly against slave trade, saying, no, much as it is a profitable business, we need to stop. We need to stop immediately. It is not good to buy or sell a fellow human being. So they did that. Now, as a result, these people were called the abolitionists because they forced governments to stop slave trade. So as they were speaking in churches, in parliament, and in open grounds, then the influence started to grow. As a result, these people were called the abolitionists. Abolitionists. I hope you can pronounce that. Abolitionists. That means they were the people who started to end slave trade. Now, to continue, we see that their influence led to the abolition of slave trade in Europe, Africa, and America. Remember the Great Triangle trade: England, Africa, America. So with the influence of these abolitionists, their voices started to spread in England, Africa, and America, and slave trade started to decline. So, for example, here we're saying Britain passed a law forbidding slave trade throughout the British Empire in 1808. So, in 1808, Britain said no more slave trade in our empire. So they said, we are no longer doing that. So they did that in Britain in 1807. And slave trade was declared illegal in Britain in 1833. So in Britain, by 1833, they said anyone who is embarking on slave trade is going to be arrested because it is an illegal business. So it was declared to be illegal business in 1833. Now in France, Spain, and Portugal, they also passed the laws abolishing slavery in their colonies between 1848 and 1888. So when it started with Britain, then France, Spain, Portugal, they also followed. They also abolished slave trade between 1848 and 1888. They said no more slave trade in our territories. And also in America, Abraham Lincoln, the President of the United States of America, declared all slaves free in his country in 1863. So in America in 1863, the President himself, by the name Abraham Lincoln, he declared that in my country, in America, no one is a slave. Those who are having slaves, they should be free, starting from that year in 1863. And the slave trade completely ended in the United States of America in 1865. So by 1865, slave trade completely ended in America. No one was sold as a slave. No one was regarded as a slave. So the abolition of slavery in America marked the end of slave trade in West Africa. So you can see it that abolition of slave trade started in England. Then the ideas spread everywhere. So in America also it ended. Therefore, the end result was that even in West Africa, where people were taken now, it also ended. No one was taken from West Africa to go to America as a slave. So it ended when it ended in America in 1865. Now, to this far, we have come to the end of this unit. We are looking at the West Africa slave trade. We have looked at how slaves were taken. We have mentioned about that there were wars and foreigners were coming to capture them. We have also looked at the effects of slave trade. We have looked at the Great Triangle slave trade and the goods or the items that were involved in this trade, in the Great Triangle trade. So know these things, But before I leave you, here with me is an exercise. So you pause this video a little bit, go through the questions, understand the questions and write them somewhere. Show them to your teacher, and he's going to assist you in that way. But next time, we are going to look at unit number 4. And this unit is about partition of Africa. Partition of Africa. It's another good unit that we are going to look at. So be there next time, and until next time, thank you so much.